Hi, and welcome to the Lumida Legacy Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Gilder. On this podcast, we'll explore how to achieve and plan for a long, healthy life, as well as how to prepare for the inevitable and unforeseen through estate planning, insurance, and end-of-life decisions. We'll talk candidly with experts who advise high and ultra-high net worth clients so you can learn how to apply their strategies and tactics to your own longevity and legacy planning. So I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Tyler Cooper, the CEO of the Cooper Clinic. And for those that don't know, the Cooper Clinic is really not only at the forefront of preventative medicine, but it is the father of all preventative medicine clinics in the country. And so really pleased to be joined today by Dr. Tyler Cooper. And Dr. Cooper, if you could maybe kick us off a little bit of the background of the Cooper Clinic itself, which was started not by you, the Dr. Cooper that's joining us today, but actually by your father, Dr. Cooper.
That's right. First of all, thanks for having me today, Justin. It's a pleasure to be with you. And so, yeah, it goes back a long way, actually, into a time when most people can't imagine anymore that it wasn't believed that exercise was good for your health. And my father was working in the military at the time, back in the late 50s and early 60s, and he was transferred over to NASA. And he was tasked with how do you counteract the effects of long-term exposure to zero gravity of all the men going to the moon during the Apollo lunar mission. Just a small job there. But he had been an athlete in college before going into medicine and had always believed that fitness was good for your health. And so he did some testing to believe that if he could get the astronauts in a better level of physical fitness, they would be able to handle the trip easier and recover. So how that leads to prevention is unusual, but that's where it all started. And that at that point, he created a hypothesis, which was exercise is good for your health. And if you correlate it to measured medical examinations and results like cholesterol and all these different types of factors, that you would see a benefit. And like any good hypothesis, you have to set it up is you first have the question, but then how do you collect the data in order to prove the question out? And so how do you measure physical fitness? And that's where it all started for my father back in the 60s, is he created a way to use VO2 measurement during exercise to correlate it as a quantitative measure of fitness. And originally he did that through gas exchange on a treadmill stress test, and then he correlated that to a field test, of which some of your listeners may know, the Cooper test or the 12-minute run. And that was the original test to start measuring fitness. But over time, he started collecting data for all the people that he was putting through these fitness evaluations. But then wondered, how do you get people healthier? How do you get them more fit? And so in 1968, he published his first book called Aerobics. Actually invented that word aerobics, added an S to aerobic and made it a noun. And funny side story is that the publisher was wanting to name the book that because that was the first chapter. My dad thought they were crazy. People would never be able to remember that name or pronounce it. And now it's second home or second nature to everybody. But so anyway, that original book was like essentially the first how-to book on fitness and getting fit and why it mattered. And it consisted of doing the 12-minute run and then 32 cardiovascular exercises that were correlated to a point system of oxygen consumption, that if you got a certain number of points per week, then that would put you in another level of fitness. And for example, a point was considered to run an 8-minute mile was 1 point. And your goal was to get between 10 to 30 points a week. And that is really what is credited with starting the whole exercise revolution, the jogging craze, all of that is my father's original book. But so in 1970, at age of 40, he decided to leave the Air Force and come to Dallas to start where we are today. And the goal with that was to start a preventive medicine clinic, upon which the foundation of what we do here in our clinic is the measurement of fitness, being the foundational element of how we improve people's health. You got to remember in 1970, there were no such things as preventive medicine clinics. You went to the doctor when you were sick, not when you were healthy. Certainly back in those days, again, exercise was thought to be damaging to your health. When my father was in med school, he was taught that your heart only has so many beats. And if you run through them more quickly by exercising, you'll die sooner. Also, the idea of hypertrophy of the heart, that if you exercise more, your heart was going to become enlarged and lose its ability to function. And all of which we know to be false now, but that was the pressure that, or not the pressure, but that was the education that he was receiving when around exercise. So it was really just to reach out and to make the claim that I'm going to tell everybody to exercise, and I'm going to focus my medical practice truly on prevention and prevention alone was crazy. But the goal is that people who would come to our clinic, they would go through a comprehensive physical evaluation, of which the most important piece was actually getting on a treadmill stress test and measuring their VO2, which we still do today. And what the treadmill consists of is you walk at 2.2 miles an hour, or excuse me, 3.3 miles an hour, and it goes up roughly a degree per minute, and you go as long as you can. And based on how long you can go, we can get a predicted VO2 and then classify that into your age and gender to give you an evaluation of your level of fitness, which I'll refer to more in later when we talk about research. But that was revolutionary. And so that was the foundation of the fitness center or excuse me, of the clinic. And everybody's gone through the clinic in the last 53 years. All their data has gone into our nonprofit research institute to be able to eventually produce the first study in 1989 that showed the physiological benefits of exercise. At the same time, he also started here on our campus a physical fitness center, which there really wasn't anything like that in 1970 either. Maybe you had a YMCA or something like that, but not a fitness center that we know today. And so a lot of background there, but there's a lot to say on really how my father and this organization changed the entire landscape of how we look at fitness, how we look at exercise, how we look at preventive medicine. And one closing note on that was so interesting is that when my dad launched the book in 68 and then opened the facility here in 70, they tried to take his medical license away from him here in Dallas for doing treadmill stress tests. I believe there was editorials in magazines and the New York Times and so forth said my father was going to kill more people than Hitler by promoting jogging, that there'd be millions of dead joggers around the world as people followed my father's advice. That's what he was up against. So it's an incredible story. And I always use the analogy, imagine you're a missionary and you go to some island where no one believes what you believe. You do such a good job converting the island to that belief. By the time those people's grandkids come around, they never knew they weren't that belief. And that's essentially what my father and this organization has done with fitness and prevention.
Yeah, it is an incredible story, and it's not too often that you actually get to say that somebody wrote the book on something, but he actually wrote the book
You
Aerobics,
did.
which is incredible. Now, tell us a little bit about your journey as well, because now you run and are the CEO of the Cooper Clinic. But what was that journey like?
I was born in 1970. I'm 6 days younger than the business. And so when I say I've truly grown up in it, I've truly grown up in it. And a funny little story is no one believed in what my dad was trying to do when he came to Dallas in 1970. And so no banks would give him any money or anything like that. And there was a CEO of a company here in Dallas who believed in what he was doing and what he wanted to start. And they loaned him the original money to start the business. The company was called the Tyler Corporation, which again, I was born a few days later, and that's where I got my name. So when I say I am fully embedded in this business, even back to my name, I grew up in a very unique environment where I was fortunate to travel around the world with my father as we went and as a family preached this concept of preventive medicine, of fitness, with the goal of using it to improve the quality and the quantity of people's lives. That's what we do as an organization. That's our mission statement. It's been that for over 50 years now. And it was really unique to grow up in an environment where what you're doing, you can tangibly see the effects on the people that you're reaching almost daily, whether it be through the improvement in their physical health, their mental health, their general well-being, their spiritual health, whatnot. It was a real blessing. But even with that, in my early days, I did not want to be part of the business. I had no interest in being a doctor and ended up going to Baylor University on a partial track scholarship. And that was my real interest, was in running, and ended up getting a business degree there because I figured no matter what in life, that would be helpful, right? And then after I graduated, I went off and did my own thing for a while, for a few years. But it was during that time that I got away from the family business and out of the shadow of my father, if you will, that I realized was really able to see what a unique business this is. And as I thought about my career and what I wanted to do with my life, I've been around all types of successful people. And what I find is the most appealing way to spend your life, certainly it's foundational in my faith, is the ability to help other people tangibly every day. And I thought about that. There's not really a better way for me to do that than by being engaged in this business where we do that with hundreds of thousands of lives, literally. And so I had no pre-medical requirements completed. I had been straight business in college. And so I moved back to Dallas and I started working and taking pre-meds at night. I did that for about 2.5 years to finish my requirements to then to apply to med school, and then got in, went to medical school, did my residency, and also received a master's in public health and healthcare management, and then came back. And I've been now back for about 18 years. And I oversee all of our businesses. We have 7 businesses under the umbrella, of which the Cooper Clinic is one. And then I still see patients a few days a week. I definitely want to be engaged on the one-on-one basis. And it's just an awesome place to be because, like I said, what we did from day one in working to improve the quality and quantity of people's lives, we're still doing that today. And it's a wonderful blessing to see that type of ROI. Certainly, I run a business and you need an ROI. There's no mission without a margin, as Covey always said, right? But in the same light, the margin never outpaces the mission in our business. And that's what I think keeps us going so well. And that's why we've had so much of the success we've had for literally decades of doing what we're doing. And the future continues to look bright.
Yeah, it's incredible. How many patients have you interacted with roughly through the Cooper Clinic? Not you personally, the clinic itself.
Over the last 53 years, I think we've had over 350,000 patients come through our clinic. And a lot of those have been coming for years and years. So they'll come, we have patients who've been coming 30, 40 years. Every year they come through. We see about 70% of our patients are return patients, 30% are new. About half of our patients are corporate sponsored. So we have about 450 companies around the globe that send their executives here to do their full comprehensive evaluation. And then the remainder of the business is private pay individuals. We take no insurance. Insurance doesn't really cover the spectrum of what we do. And I understand that. I view medicine from more of an egalitarian perspective than a utilitarian perspective. And so we're helping the people that come here. But we've been able to touch a lot of lives, but well beyond the people that we see here, we reach millions of lives around the world through our books, our education, our research. It was this organization, our research division, that proved the benefits of exercise as being beneficial to your health. And that's changed the world forever. So in some regards, this little institution in Dallas, Texas has changed the world and everybody on it for the knowledge of what it means to be fit and what that means to the quality and quantity of your life to come.
So take me back to the early years of the Cooper Clinic. You mentioned a little bit of traveling around with your family. And I think when we previously spoke, you mentioned something about having some trips to Brazil that I still can't shake that story because I find it so fascinating. Maybe tell us a little bit about some of the people who were early adopters and understanders of the insights that the book Aerobics revealed.
So again, like I mentioned earlier, the original book, Aerobics, came out in 1968. And shortly after that time, maybe 6 months later or so, one of the Brazilian World Cup coaches, one of the World Cup soccer team from Brazil, a guy named Claudio Coutinho, had read the book and met my father at some event and asked him to come and train the Brazilian World Cup team for the upcoming 1970 World Cup. It was going to be Pelé's last World Cup. And you got to remember, at this time, the way athletes trained is not like they train today, right? You didn't have all the knowledge of off-season fitness and all that. You just went and played your sport. And so the concept of getting athletes in shape beyond just their skill set was completely new. And so over the course of the next 2 years or so prior to the World Cup, my dad traveled to Brazil many times and worked with the Brazilian coaches and the team to get them into physical fitness shape, having them do the 12-minute run, designing exercise programs to enhance their cardiovascular conditioning in addition to what they were doing with their skill set practices. And if you look at that World Cup, they went undefeated. And if you look at most of the scores, Brazil, it was fairly close in the first half. And then Brazil would blow their doors off in the second half because they were so much more physically fit. And it was a huge success in Brazil. And it was well known that my father, the Dr. Cooper from America, was training the team. And so when they won, he became a national hero in Brazil. And at the time, there was no word for running or jogging in the sense of the way we think about it, exercising. And they started calling it doing your Cooper. And if you go to Brazil, you'll still see that people are going to do their Cooper. You'll see Cooper signs. Now, this generation, what I alluded to earlier, doesn't really have any idea why it's called that. but that is in fact the case. And growing up, I got to travel with my dad to Brazil many times, and honestly, it was like he was a rock star down there. He'd get mobbed and have to have security and all sorts of things. It was, especially in the 80s and 70s and 80s, it was really fascinating to see. What's also interesting from that 70 World Cup was that the referees were not able to keep up with the pace of play. And so FIFA reached out to my father. And so we started working directly with FIFA for many years to train their referees and linesmen to be able to stay in good enough shape to manage the game so they keep up with the pace of play. And so they adopted the 12-minute test. And in fact, what's really interesting, in 1994, when the World Cup was in the US, all the referees and linesmen stayed at our facility. We have a hotel here on campus, and they all stayed here. And then they would fly out to their respective games. So we've had a great relationship with FIFA for 50 plus years now, and with Brazil. And after that time, my father worked with other teams in different countries. And so I've been fortunate to grow up in a very unique environment and see a lot of different types of people and a lot of experiences based off of what we're trying to do to help other people.
That's incredible. You've mentioned the 12-minute test a couple times. Could you elaborate on what exactly that is so we can all understand?
To go back again, as I mentioned earlier, you have to be able to measure fitness. There has to be a quantitative measure. As an analogy, if I check your blood pressure, there's an actual quantitative result, right? Maybe 120/70. If I check your cholesterol, I get an absolute result. Maybe it's 192 or something like that. Fitness, how do you put a metric to it to that regard? And so that's where my dad came up with the concept of using VO2, which is your body's ability to exchange oxygen. And the better shape you are, the better you can do that, the more oxygen exchange. He decided to use that as the metric of evaluating a person's level of fitness. And to do that officially, to do the gas exchange, it's a very arduous process. You put on this mask, and you have to do a treadmill stress test, a maximal result treadmill stress test. It's time consuming, it's expensive. And so that wasn't scalable. That was not a scalable way to measure fitness on large swaths of people. And so he tried to come up with a field test in which you could do it very simply and then scientifically correlate it back to an actual VO2. And that's what the 12-minute test was. And so he designed it for the Air Force. That's where it started. And what he did was he would have people, the goal of the test is to run as far as you can in 12 minutes. And based on how far you can run, that actually correlates to a predicted VO2 as correlated by someone actually who's doing the test. And using that result then gives that person an actual measurement of their fitness. Over the years, because we've tied so many other metrics into that, so when you go through the clinic, we still measure it. We do it on a treadmill. We can measure it without the mask and still get essentially the same result. But then we tie that to your other 3,000 points of information that you do. For example, a total cholesterol is 1, a blood pressure is 1, a fasting glucose is 1, and we have 3,000 metrics that we're catching on everybody who comes to the clinic. And so with that and their fitness evaluation, we put that over into our nonprofit database, and that's where we were able to produce the research. But it's that research in measurement of fitness that enabled us to produce the research produce the studies that changed the whole world on how you view fitness and its correlation to your actual physical health.
Okay. You've mentioned that those groundbreaking studies and that long-term research led to the insights that now we take for granted, or at least many of us do, that exercise improves health and improves outcomes. I know we've talked a little bit, not yet today, but previously about the concept of health span. And maybe could you expand on what that concept is and how that plays into preventative medicine and exercise as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Prior to the 1989 study, the study that I've alluded to that proved the benefits of exercise, the belief at that time was that more was better, that it was a linear regression, that if you could walk a mile versus run a mile versus run 5 versus run a marathon, the marathoner would have the very best benefit, that they would get the most physiological benefit on longevity and quality of life. And what was so interesting about that 89 study is that what it showed is that just getting out of the bottom category of fitness relevant to your age and gender, as measured by your time on the treadmill, which is the predicted VO2, just getting out of the bottom 20th percentile would increase your lifespan by 6 years and decrease your risk of dying of any cause by 58%. But to move on up the scale, to get all the way up to a superior level of fitness, you got very little gain. And one of the big problems in our world today is if you ask someone if they're fit, they don't know. They don't have any idea unless they've been through the Cooper Clinic. They may tell you how much they work out, but they don't have that quantitative measure. And that quantitative measure is so valuable in predicting your quality and quantity of life to come. And the misnomer is that they might see a Nike commercial or a Fitbit commercial, and they see some young person who's super fit, and that's what they think it means to be fit. They don't realize that if they can just get off the sofa and walk a collective 30 minutes a day, 3 to 5 times a week, they're going to get a 6-year benefit and longevity and a 58% reduction in all-cause mortality. And so when you see the Surgeon General recommendations and all that, when it comes to exercise recommendations, that all comes from our research. And so what we're trying to do is allow people to understand how little it takes, how little effort it takes to have an enormous impact on improving the quality and quantity of life. Now, if you're just walking 30 minutes 5 times a week, you're not going to be able to go out and run marathons and all that. But for the relevance of decreasing cancer, decreasing diabetes risk, decreasing cardiovascular disease risk, decreasing depression, the list goes on and on. Just that little amount of exercise makes a huge difference. And so what we want to do, again, is teach people what it really means to be fit, as opposed to maybe what they've been seeing from a marketing perspective with super fit people, if you will.
Okay. Now you mentioned that there's, I think, incremental gains, or it's like not that much of a difference. What do you mean when you say that there's not perhaps that much of an outcome difference if you move from, let's just say, fit to super fit for generic term?
You're going to decrease your mortality rate from 58%, which is just getting out of the bottom category. You may get up to 63%. So the biggest bang for your buck is not being unfit, not being in that bottom category. Now, in other aspects like dementia and these sorts of things, there is more of a linear benefit. But the reality is we got to deal in the world we're living in today where 70% of our population is overweight or obese. Most people aren't doing anything. And so my goal is not to get the people who are already exercising to exercise more. My goal is being realistic from a public health perspective is how do I get the people who are doing nothing? And then, by the way, are costing us the most on healthcare dollars, because we've done study on that as well, to just get out of the bottom category of fitness, because it's going to improve the quality and quantity of their lives. And we also published a study in 2015 that showed we decreased Medicare expense by half, almost half, if they just get out of that bottom category of fitness. Tell me anything else in the world right now that even has a hope of reducing Medicare expense. And we know, we've published it. It's in 2015. You can look it up, that we know that we can reduce it just by getting people to just an adequate level of fitness, nothing beyond that. But certainly the more fit you are, the more you can do. If you enjoy doing more activities, you want to be more active later into life, certainly you want to be more active. But if we're talking about just extending the length of your life and minimizing disease, that's the bare necessity that will get a massive return for you.
Yeah, that's an incredible statistic, by the way, cutting Medicare costs in half. So what does it look like when a new patient comes to the Cooper Clinic? How do they get this assessment?
People come from all over the world to our clinic, and we have a hotel on campus if they're coming from out of the area. But what it consists of, it's a full day comprehensive evaluation. It starts with giving a blood draw. We do comprehensive blood labs. We're going to look at things that you would not get at your normal physician. A first time visit, if they're of age, 40 years or older, we're going to do a CT scan to look for cardiovascular disease, look for cancer. We are the company, the clinic that started using that to evaluate CAC scores and calcification scores back in the mid 90s. And so we were leaders on that. Do a complete comprehensive history and physical with the physician. Our doctors only see max 3 patients a day, so we're never in a hurry. And we're going to talk about everything. We're going to get to talk about everything you want to talk about, because it's all of your health. It's not just what's on the top of your problem list. We're going to do a treadmill stress test, as I mentioned. We're to look for any early signs of cardiovascular disease and to get an accurate measure of your level of fitness. We do a full dermatological screening to look for any early signs of cancer. We also have additional services. We have optometry. We have a sleep specialist. We have our own gastrointestinal services where we can do colonoscopy and endoscopy. We have all of our own radiological services. So if we find, and cardiology as well. And so if we find anything along the way, it's all in-house and we get things done right away. So for example, let's say you had an abnormal finding on your stress test. We can put you upstairs and do an echocardiogram or a CTA to evaluate that in more detail same day. And what we do in today's world, at least, you can piece it together through other organizations But we do it comprehensive all day in one day, looking at everything. And then, most importantly, giving you the results in the same day, but then giving you a game plan of how to maximize your choices going forward. We'll have you meet with our nutrition team. We can have you meet with our exercise physiologist so that you leave here with a plan to start changing your life towards healthy. It's the old adage of how do you eat an elephant a bite at a time. So if somebody comes in here in horrific shape and this, we're not going to tell them, oh, you got to do this and this. We're going to say, all right, what are the baby steps in which we can start you on the right path to moving forward? But before any of that, the first thing we do is helping out someone understand why they should listen to us. Why does it matter what we find? Yeah, you probably want to live longer, but honestly, living longer doesn't motivate a lot of change in people because they don't think they're going to die tomorrow. They know that maybe I'm going to die, we're all going to die someday, but most people are not motivated by that because they have precedence of waking up every morning, right? And they don't think tomorrow morning they're not going to wake up until heart disease, which often is sudden death, can often be the first symptom. They don't feel it. And so we're trying to explain to them that, yeah, it's going to live longer, but it's also the quality of those years that we're shooting for. So that you can be like my dad, who's almost 93 and he's in the office today. And he drove to Colorado this summer. He was hiking in the mountains, traveled to Europe. He just finished a new book. He's almost 93 years old, and he's sharp as a tack, and he exercises every day. And my mom too. And people might say, well, that's genetics. And I'm like, no, his dad died at 77. His mom died at 80. He's practiced preventive medicine to find disease at its earliest stages when you can treat it effectively. But then more than that, he's made healthy, moderate choices throughout his life in order to put the scale in his favor that he's going to have a less likely problem of things like dementia, cancer, heart disease, and so forth. The quality of the life is just as important as the quantity of life. And here at the Cooper Clinic, based on what we do, our average patients live 10 years longer than the national average. And again, it's not just about useless years. They're well used years. We had one patient who we've been seeing for decades at the age of 90, who'd been a longtime patient, decided he wanted to pick up competitive track and field. He started at the age of 90 and he competed all the way up till he died at 102. His quality of life from 90 to 102 was amazing. He was traveling all over the world, competing. He wrote a book. He was on TV. And it wasn't because he had tremendous genetics. It's because throughout most of his life, he made the right decisions. But again, I want to be really emphatic on this point. We're not a bunch of perfectionists down here running marathons and eating vegan all the time. We believe in balance. We believe in moderation so that it's feasible. Because most people, when you go to the extremes of things, not that those things are necessarily bad, but most people are not willing to go to those extremes. And that what we know is that they don't have to still get a tremendous amount of benefit to lengthening their life. And as I look at my dad, people ask me, how has your dad done it? And I'll say there's three things, and I think this may play well with your audience based on what you've told me, is success is a lot more than just accolades of others and collecting wealth. It's making a difference. And in our family, it starts with our faith. My dad's a man of great faith. And so he has a purpose in his life, which is to help other people as based off of his faith, his Christian faith. So there's a reason to get out of bed in the morning. There's a purpose to life. Second, he's been very consistent in the things that I mentioned with regards to his diet and his weight and his exercise. He is not fanatical about it by any means. He exercises 30 minutes, 5 to 6 days a week. He eats 3 decent balanced meals and gets a good amount of sleep. And that's helped him throughout his life. He's maintained a decent weight. And then the third piece, which is really important in today's world, is that he's never stopped studying. So he has every night, my dad, if you go to his home, he'll still be in his office studying medical journals, whatnot, anything. He's engaged the brain. And as we see dementia becoming so much more of a problem today, one of the things that I've seen in my practice that I believe is part of the problem is that you have to think of your brain like a muscle, right? And if I don't use my bicep, what's going to happen? It's going to atrophy and become very weak. Your brain is not a muscle, but if you think of it in that same analogy, if I'm not using it, it's going to become weak. And consequently, increasing the risk for the development of dementia. Obviously, as we age, our brain becomes less sharp. But we're trying to slow the decay of that, not just our mental health, but our physical health, our well-being, all of that, by keeping consistent throughout the course of our life so that we call it squaring off the curve. You live a long, healthy life, And one day, having done what you wanted to do the day before, you just don't wake up. And that's what we're preaching. That's what we're teaching. And that's what we're helping and enabling people to do to enhance the quality and quantity of their life.
You mentioned, I think you said a decade longer. Did I hear you right there?
Yeah, our studies show that our patients live on average a decade longer. And I'll say people say, oh, it's because they're coming and they're getting this incredible medical care that most of the community can't afford. I don't disagree with that. That's the egalitarian versus the utilitarian view of the world. But the reality is, while we find cancer early, the real change that we make as based off of the research and allowing people to live that longer is we get them to start caring about their level of fitness. If I can do nothing else than get someone out of their bottom category of fitness relevant to age and gender, as I mentioned earlier, that will extend their life by 6 years. I know that 6 years of the benefit is just that, of that 10-year benefit. 6 of it is just not being terribly unfit. And if you can do that, and then the other stuff, it's basic stuff. It's getting colonoscopy starting at 40, looking earlier for disease, doing regular skin cancer screening, finding cancers before they become problematic. Going to your doctor, knowing what's inside. It's like judging a car on how well it runs by never looking under the hood. You don't do that, right? You don't ignore it. You get your oil changed, you air up the tires, you go in for routine maintenance on your car so that it will last longer. And if you didn't do that, you're not going to be surprised when one day your car just doesn't start. But so many people try to judge their health and their well-being by how they feel, and that's only a part of the picture. And the problem with feeling too is because it changes slowly over time. If I could put my 52-year-old body next to my 22-year-old body, and we have a conversation about how I'm feeling, I'd probably, wow, I thought I was feeling pretty good today, but compared to 22 version me, I guess not. But I do know compared to the average 52-year-old, I'm still living a very active and full life, and I'm really not limited from doing anything that I want to do because I have balance in it all. But again, if anybody pretty much can do a basic level of fitness and they'll get that tremendous benefit in longevity and quality of life. The science is out there. We've produced hundreds of studies along these lines and showing that. And if they go to our website, you can give them that. You can read all of these studies and learn about it yourself. You do not have to go through the Cooper Clinic to get that benefit, but certainly the type of medicine that we practice is advantageous even at the next level above.
Yeah. We'll have all those in the show notes. We talked a lot about exercise being a fundamental pillar of extending life here, getting out of the bottom 20%. And that makes a ton of sense. How about diet and nutrition as a component of this? You talked about your father still eats balanced meals and things like that. How do you think about nutrition and what does the Cooper Clinic do to help people evaluate their nutrition and plan for any changes?
So part of our program here is that when you come through our clinic, prior to coming in, you send in a 3-day food diary in which you do a couple of average weekday intakes of what you would eat typically and a weekend. And then we process all of that to look at the contents of calories, fats, proteins, all of that. And then you meet with our nutritionist to go over all of those results and then design a program to see where the weaknesses are. Maybe you're not getting enough protein. Maybe you're not getting enough fiber. How can we enhance your diet relevant to the world in which you live in? If you're a busy executive, how do you eat at an airport? We're just very practical in that regard. And then we also do basic metabolic testing. So we look at someone's resting metabolic rate. And so how many calories, which is a measure of your calorie. It's like an engine. What do you redline or what do you idle at as far as RPMs? How many calories, if I just sat here all day and did nothing, how many calories am I going to burn? That's an RMR. And so we test that. And so let's say it's 1,700. Now I know that I'm going to burn 1,700 just by being alive. And if I exercise and I burn 400 calories and just my activities of daily life, if I eat under 2,100 calories, I'm going to lose weight. And so we just try to be very mathematical about it. Diet and exercise, diet is not that complicated. It's a matter of eating the healthier foods and controlling calorie content, but you have to be educated in that regard. And that's what we try to help people do. And we don't try to say, hey, you've got to, nothing, I'm not against being a vegan at all, but you don't have to be that to be healthy per se. But you do need to educate yourself enough to know what's bad and what's not. A lot of people think they know what's healthy and what's not. Sometimes a salad can be a lot more calories and fat and cholesterol based on what's on it than something that you would think was not healthy. And so just trying to give people that insight into their diet and be realistic with it, because it's hard in today's world, in the world in which we live in, where convenience has overtaken everything. And many people, I think I saw a statistic that half of the people in America eat fast food every day. Every day. Okay. So we're not going to get that to change realistically. But if we can teach people how, if that's part of their life, how do we get them to make healthier choices, decrease their calorie content? So I always say what you weigh. I'll tell my patients, I don't really care what you weigh. I don't care what the number is, because if you're exercising and you're eating, you're going to weigh whatever you're supposed to weigh. I'll tell patients, I don't say, hey, I want you to lose 10 pounds. I say, hey, I want you to make these changes to your diet. And I want you to make sure you're getting this amount of exercise. And we're going to work into that. And in 6 months, we'll weigh you again. Because people get obsessed with the number as opposed to the concept of being healthy. It's your weight, how much you weigh is downstream of the choices that cause it, right? I'm upstream of your actual body weight. I'm up here trying to focus on things that are going to help you live healthier. And subsequently, your weight will fall in line with that in time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Weight is like a lagging indicator of all these activities. Do you think people are honest in those food journals with you?
That's a great question. The fact that I always find that the fact that people are coming here by choice, that they're choosing to come here, in my experience, they come here because they really do want to get better. They want to maximize it. Now, some of them they're company sponsored and they're a little questioning, what is this that I'm getting into? But my dad always says, and the company has taken this on, is people care equally as much about how much you care as about how much. And so when they come here and they experience our culture, and that we're not here for any other purpose than to help them, and we're serious about that, and we're not in a hurry, and that the people who work here have chosen to work here and they believe in the culture, it's a unique place. And so I think generally people feel a level of trust. I can tell you as a physician, when I put this white coat on and the door closes in my office, I'll have people I just met tell me something they've never told anyone else in their entire life within the first 10 minutes. People are desperate to be honest in our world. And unfortunately, I guess in a lot of places, they don't feel like they have that opportunity, and they trust the doctor and they trust our services. And so I think that most people, if they don't start there initially, they do get there when they realize that all we're trying to do is help them, that I don't make a living based on whether or not they make these changes. I make a living on being here, trying to help them have the right attitude and have the right motivation to make those decisions. And everybody has a different why. Some people, they want to be able, like me, I had kids later in life, and I want to be, when I'm 70 and 80, still skiing and surfing and doing all the things I love with my kids and grandkids. And so I'm making healthier choices now. Plus, I want to have my mind sharp. Other people, maybe different type of motivation, but you just take people where they are. And I will tell you one interesting story, because people tell me they may be too far gone. I'm like, no one's too far gone. It's never too late. I can show you science now. It's never too late. But one of my favorite stories is a gentleman who came to us in the year 2000, and he weighed 538 pounds. He couldn't walk 50 yards. He was in horrific shape. You can imagine what all his blood studies were and all that. It was just a nightmare story of health. But he had an attitude that he wanted to get better. And over the course of the next 2 years, he worked with our exercise physiology team. He worked with our nutrition team, and he lost 300 pounds just through diet and exercise alone. No surgeries, no medications. And I'm not against those, but in this specific situation, he did what it took. He made those changes, and he's kept it off now for 23 years. And on the 10-year anniversary of him dropping that weight, he and I went and ran the New York Marathon together. And it was highlighted on ESPN and all this. And what was so fun is we were both wearing these T-shirts that had a picture of him on the back when he weighed 538 pounds. And the whole time they're like, that's you, as we were running by people. They were just blown away. And so again, that's extreme example, but it's an extreme example to show that no one's without hope. And no matter where you are, wherever you're starting from, that is your starting line. And in life, we don't start from the same starting lines. We all have different advantages and disadvantages. And whatever it is, you just take it as what it is, and you start from there, and you start taking the little steps forward until all of a sudden you've created real change that not only has improved the quality and quantity of your life, but in the situation of my friend, it's changed the quality and quantity of lives of thousands of other people that he's been able to speak to. In fact, his autobiography is coming out this year. He was on Oprah several times. the decisions that he made have had such a lasting impact on so many others because they look at Rick and they go, man, if that guy can do it, I think I can do it. And so that's where we take people. We didn't say, listen, you're a lost cause, go get surgery. No, we said, hey, this is where you are today. And next week, we're going to try to see if we can walk 55 yards. And that's how we did it. And over time, it's changed his life. He's an entirely different person, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, everything that you can think of.
Wow, that's incredibly inspiring. I'm excited to look that up. That's wow, gives you kind of goosebumps thinking that somebody can put in that dedication and come from that challenging of a place. And I was thinking of asking you about, have you counted calories and how tough that can be following up to the honesty question. But if somebody can do it from over 500 pounds, anybody can count the calories and figure it out.
Anybody can count the calories, but I will tell you, it's one of the beauties that we do with our nutritionists is that they'll work with anybody. People come here just for nutrition. It's not so you can come and use our services somewhat ad hoc. And we have our fitness center here. We have our corporate division where we work with corporations where we instill these tools into companies. And we have a supplementation line that helps provide for our research. So we're trying to bring scientific legitimacy into supplementation. We have a multitude of different organizations that do this, but people work just with our nutrition services. And a lot of times they'll come through and throughout the year, they're working with the nutritionist, checking in once a week, once a month, whatever it may be, to provide that accountability. They do that with our exercise physiologist as well. And so it's not like a one and done kind of thing. We're here to help you on that journey. We're here to help you along that way. And honestly, I don't care if it's us or somebody else. A rising tide floats all boats kind of thing. And we're part of the tide. We're not all of the tide. And I'm great with that. I want to help the people that come across our path. And I want to help anybody who I can in teaching them what we know where they may be able to help other people as well.
Can you talk a little bit about supplements? Is that something that you could share a little bit on? If you have the right baseline, then supplements count. But what do you look for when you're thinking about supplements?
So I'll tell you the first thing, a supplement by definition is a supplement to a healthy diet, not in lieu of or in place of it. It's also not going to cure cancer. It's not going to do all these ridiculous things that often get tied to it. It's a supplement in addition to a diet that's not meeting the needs of your body in a lot of cases. And we're learning more. But how we got into supplementation is back in the late 80s, early 90s, you were seeing a lot of really bizarre cancers with some very famous endurance related athletes. And there was my father and our research team had a question is why is that occurring? And the belief is because they consume so much more oxygen and because of the nature of our air today, that there's a free radical nature to that air and breathing in more of it was damaging to their body. And so a free radical essentially is an oxygen molecule that's out of balance. It only has 7 electrons instead of 8. And it's like a bully on the block. It's going to balance itself at the consequence of others, molecules in your body and so forth. And so supplements are designed to actually help balance that. That was the original concept. And so my dad wrote a book in 1994 called The Antioxidant Revolution. And with his idea at that time of what was a good balance of supplementation based off the research that he was seeing to be additive to a healthy lifestyle. And from that, in the late 90s, we started looking into supplementation. We had no interest in creating our own supplement line. I just wanted to provide good, balanced recommendations. But what we found is that industry was not very reliable in what was being put into their products. And for example, the back of a product may say vitamin E. Well, scientifically, there's D-alpha tocopherol and L-alpha tocopherol. And D is the natural form, L is the synthetic. We know that L is a lot cheaper. D is more expensive, but D is better absorbed. And so there's things like that, or people don't know what the estimated recommendations are and these sorts of things. We designed a line where what was in the product was what we said was in it, that you could trust what's on the back. And then we have continued with that as the research shows what the recommendation should be, as we worked with colleagues over the years, we changed the formulation of the supplements to meet those needs. And things that we've been testing here for years, like we measure your omega-3 fish oil levels. We measure your vitamin D, your B12. We measure testosterone. We've done all these things for years. And so then we tie it into our research to see what are the correlations. And so you see a lot of things about vitamin D, for example, that are out now, of the need for vitamin D and prevention of different types of disease. Certainly there was a strong correlation with D and the propensity for COVID and severity of COVID. You may have seen a lot of that. And so we just try to be an honest source that can be trusted with supplementation. And honestly, if someone else has a reliable product, fine. A lot of our sales go towards continuing our research. And so it's a little tricky for us to be in that because we always want to be a trusted resource, not look like we're profiting off of things like that. But in an untrustworthy industry where people are making ridiculous claims and there's a lot of kind of multi-level type selling to it, where people are making claims that probably are not realistic, we wanted to provide some balance to that. But the first thing I tell someone to do is have those levels checked. Do you run low in vitamin D? Do you run low in B12? Are there specific supplementation elements? Are you low in your fish oil levels? Just see, again, look under the hood to see. Maybe you're good and you don't need it. But most people we found are not in that situation.
So what kind of tests or tests does one need to run to assess that? Is that like a type of battery of tests? If you couldn't make it to the Cooper Clinic, what is somebody else who's listening to know what supplements they should take?
I would tell you basic ones you want to look at. You want to look at your vitamin D level, easy to check. You want to look at a vitamin B12 level. You want to look at your levels of inflammation like C-reactive protein and homocysteine, because we know that good supplementation balances can decrease those two levels. And those are levels of inflammatory markers. Those are inflammatory markers. And we know that one of the biggest risks for cancer and cardiovascular disease is increased inflammation in our bodies. Now there's a multitude, I mean, there's tons of research coming out right now on inflammation and its negative effects. And I'm not talking about inflammation of you bruise, obviously that, but the microinflammation that's happening in our body. And so we measure those regularly to look at someone's level of inflammation. And then we have studies that show that the complementary effect of the supplements that we're using on decreasing, or at least the association with the decreased in C-reactive protein and homocysteine, that there's a lower level of inflammatory marker. So those in conjunction with omega-3s, I think are a good baseline to start because they're easily modifiable and can be in tune with other elements of your health. Beyond that, I think it's more individually specific. I don't think you need to go through some huge expensive battery of tests, but as part of your basic testing, those are things you should probably be looking at, that we look at regularly as part of our battery of blood lab studies.
And then how do you deal with sleep for your clients? Is that something that you talk about with them? And I've been doing some research on sleep, and I'm certainly not the expert here, but what was interesting to me is some recent research that came out suggesting that perhaps consistency in sleep in terms of wake and sleep times could be more important than the total number of hours of sleep. Because I certainly struggle to get like the 7 to 9 hours of sleep that perhaps is the recommended number of hours for somebody in my age group. Yet I think I'm very consistent in getting 6 to 6.5 hours. I wouldn't mind more sleep, but I don't find the time for it.
And I will tell you that 8 hours, that's a general time frame. Again, you may be different. There's stages of sleep, and how much time you spend in those deeper stages of sleep usually correlates with how much sleep you need. And that can be assessed during a sleep study. But sleep is essential, and it's a common problem right now. It's associated so much with our mental health challenges that we're experiencing in this country. I often say that the first barometer of your level of stress is your sleep. If you're not sleeping well and it's not related to sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea, or something like that, then it is a barometer of your stress level, most typically, is what I've experienced. And so we actually have a sleep specialist, MD sleep specialist on our staff here, who does a comprehensive sleep history evaluation and works with our patients. And again, works with patients who just come in for that as well. And we do our own sleep studies here in our hotel. And so we look at sleep as an incredibly important part of your health. But things that I know that are going to help sleep. Number one, exercise. We know you sleep better if you exercise regularly. Having good sleep habits. It should be a cold, dark room without distractions. I tell patients, don't get in your bed until you're ready to go to sleep and turn the lights off. Don't lie in bed and read a book. Don't lie in bed and watch TV. Bed is for going to sleep. And so if you want to do those things, you can put a chair next to your bed, a lazy boy, whatnot. You lean back, and when you start getting tired, you close the book, turn the light out, get in bed, or you turn the TV off, whatever it is. But good sleep habits, obviously decreasing caffeine intake earlier in the day, making sure that you're getting your hydration earlier in the day. There's all sorts of things, but it is a massive problem with health. We know that There can be an increased risk of inflammation noted with decrease in sleep. And so it is an integral part of what we do here at Cooper and encourage people to actually do an evaluation of their sleep, work with a sleep specialist, get a sleep study. See, for you, example, you don't appear to be in a position where you'd have apnea, even though you're not, you could, let me rephrase that for those who don't know. Apnea usually is associated with the larger you are. So people who have obesity have a higher risk of sleep apnea, but it's not always the case. You can have people look like you who are fit and thin, you can still have sleep apnea, it's just less likely. And so things that are going to be representative of sleep apnea is, if your spouse or whatever, if they notice that you stop breathing during the night, obviously that's a huge sign. If you wake up feeling gasping for air, out of breath, those are huge signs of sleep apnea. If you wake up in the morning and you feel like, man, I don't even feel like I ever even went to bed, I'm so tired, that can be a sign of sleep apnea. And those are all signs in which you need to go get a sleep study done. But if those aren't really your things and you just have more of the classic one I hear is I fall asleep fine, then I wake up at 2 and can't go back to sleep because my mind's racing. That is more into the mental health aspect of things. Certainly there's things that you can do to address it more specifically, but I also tell you that you've got to address the mental health. Are you addressing the stress in your life, or are you just saying keep piling it on? And so I think usually sleep is an indicator of something else. And you have to do the diagnostic evaluation to see what that something else is.
Yeah. I've had moments in my past where my stress levels have been very high and I've woken up in the middle of the night, and I can completely agree anecdotally that high levels of stress impact sleep. Now, today it's more of I like to rise at 5 a.m. to work out. And so I just don't have the time to back up 8 hours from 5 a.m. to go to sleep with two little kids who are going to bed at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. So I go to bed.
That's where you would benefit from doing a sleep study, and maybe you're getting enough of what you're doing. And based on how you feel and your general health, your broad, again, your symptoms of fatigue, somnolence, all that kind of stuff are usually the indicators of your quality of sleep. But again, we know that if you exercise regularly, you have good sleep habits, that you're going to do better. And stress, listen, none of us can avoid stress. It's not like we have a choice sometimes to avoid it, but how you manage it is certainly controllable. And so I'm a big believer, again, number one thing for controlling stress is regular exercise. Even if it's just going out and taking a walk, drop into your office and doing some push-ups. You got to imagine that our body has two basic nervous systems. It has a sympathetic and a parasympathetic. And these are things that we don't control. Our body just does this as the way we're made. A parasympathetic is known as rest and digest. So we're sitting here now, we're having a conversation. Our parasympathetic's largely in charge. And it's rest and digest. It's keeping our heart rate lower. Our blood flows more to our core, not to our extremities. Our endorphin release is lower. Our blood pressure is going to be lower. But let's say we're up in Colorado on a hike and all of a sudden a bear jumps out. Without us doing anything, our sympathetic kicks in, which is fight or flight, which you've probably heard of. It's all of a sudden our heart rate increases, our blood pressure increases, our blood is taken away from our gut and put more towards our extremities so that we can fight the bear or run away. And it's designed appropriately for us to do that, right? Because you got to get away from the bear. But more adaptive to our world is all of a sudden, let's say you're in your office and you get a call and it's a metaphorical bear on that other end of the line. And all of a sudden it causes that fight or flight response. Instead of using it appropriately, which is to physically move and to fight the bear or run away, now you're just sitting in there in your chair. And and your blood pressure's growing up and you're not doing anything with it, and it's doing damage to your body. And so in those moments of stress, immediately try to do some type of physical activity if you have those metaphorical bear moments. But the other thing is trying to prepare yourself to not be in that situation to begin with. And so we know that the biggest reliever for stress, again, exercise, as I mentioned before, and then you got to talk about it. You've got to get it out. Your body you need to discuss it. And so I'm a big proponent of counseling. And many people have a misunderstanding of what counseling is. You don't go to a counselor and they give you the lessons to life and you do X, Y, and Z and you're going to be happy. That's not how it works. A good counselor helps guide you through your thinking to understand why you're thinking the way you're thinking, and then modifying it to a level that needs to get a better quality and quantity of life. A lot of times stress it's not just one phone call that all of a sudden the stress is out of control. It's the phone call, the next phone call, the traffic, the HR issue, the financial issue, the family issue. all of them adding up until that one bear turned into some giant grizzly that's sitting on top of you. You got to get in front of that. Again, you got to get upstream of that so that you're talking about these things regularly, exercising regularly. You're not holding it inside, because holding it inside will invariably end up with you having stress to a level that can turn into anxiety, panic attacks, depression. I see it all the time. You've got to rest your brain just like you rest your body.
Yeah. Said I used to have a dog. I have many dogs today, but I had a dog that had these stress reactions, and the veterinarian talked to us about cortisol and how too many interactions that were negative for her built up and she would explode at some point. And my wife and I looked at each other and we realized that was what was going on with us too. We were at the time young lawyers and we would be working all day in stressful legal environments and then come home and the slightest misstep
Yeah,
would create a fight. We were like, why are we so stressed? But it was nothing to do with that moment. It was the buildup all day of everything else.
so perspective, talking about things, exercising, all those things can help. Because again, you're not going to escape it. We have to work. We have to do our jobs. We live in a very stressful world, to be honest. There's a lot of bad news, and so putting yourself in a situation for success, minimizing the bears, if you will, and talking about the ones that come can have a huge impact on improving that element of your life. And subsequently, usually sleep gets a lot better.
Sleep does. So we talked a lot about exercise, nutrition, sleep. I think there's also just the generalized component of preventative medicine. I know that we talked about when a new patient comes in, they do a battery of tests. Where do you think the future of preventative medicine is headed? Because as you mentioned, some ability to cut costs in half for Medicare is an incredible statement because the costs in our system are so high. They're astronomical. And I don't have the data to back it up, but you probably do. But a lot of it, my assumption is we're entirely reactive as a healthcare system. And getting ahead of these things and finding them beforehand is something that the Cooper Clinic is doing for hundreds of thousands of people. But where do you see preventative medicine going in the future beyond just the Cooper Clinic? We've got the advent of artificial intelligence around the corner. Is there some hope in the future that we're going to be getting ahead of these things?
I will tell you, the hope lies in people deciding to change their own lives. This is a grassroots thing. It doesn't matter what technology we come with, what recommendations we have. If people don't engage, it doesn't matter. And so right now, we spend over $4 trillion a year and almost 20% of our GDP as a country in our healthcare, and yet rank in the 30s on longevity. This is a really bad return on investment. But the reality is that people aren't taking responsibility for your health. Prevention, acute care, all of it, nothing matters unless an individual decides that I'm responsible for my health and I have to do the things that are going to help me be healthier. The good news in what we do and the focus on prevention is, again, trying to relay to people it doesn't take much effort. This is not some Herculean lift in order to become some marathoner. This is just getting off the sofa and doing some level of physical activity most days of the week. We won't have a healthcare problem. We've shown it with Medicare, I've shown it with more people. And so the focus of prevention and what we're trying to do at Cooper is take the most beneficial aspect of what we do for prediction of quality and quantity of life, which is a measurement of physical fitness, and put that into the hands of people all around the world. And so how we do that is we've created little testing centers where people can come in and do either on a treadmill, monitor, do a 12-minute run or a 1-mile walk, the Rockport test, and we'll give them a measurement of VO2, a predicted measure of VO2 on a scale as if they just came to the Cooper Clinic. And with that, allow them to start changing their choices, or if they need to, start focusing on their level, improving their level of fitness. So prior to coming back to Cooper, I was a primary care doctor out on the East Coast and seeing 25, 30 patients a day. And having grown up in this world, I was obviously focused on prevention and fitness and all this stuff, but I had no time for it. I had no time. I had a chief complaint list, a problem list that getting to fitness, even though I knew it was the most important, was down here. And then I knew insurance wasn't going to pay for it. And what we're trying to do and what we've done is, again, create these testing centers that doctors can use to have their patient's level of fitness tested and then upload that information into the doctor's report so that the doctor, when they do their annual physical, will see that fitness result and can manage it. And if they're not in the bottom 20th percentile, then hey, whatever you're doing, keep it up. If you're in the bottom quintile, here's a basic walking program I want you to start. That's how prevention is going to change the world. We don't need to be coming up. They're not bad, and I wouldn't say we don't need to do them. The future is not with greater technology and finding disease earlier if we can't do anything about it, right? It's doing things to prevent the disease from occurring in the first place, or decreasing the likelihood of it occurring in the first place. And we already know how to do that. And then looking early, starting things earlier, looking at things earlier when you can still make a real change in someone's life. Again, things like colonoscopies, skin cancer screening, appropriate CT scanning, these sorts of things. That can change someone's life and be much more cost effective by avoiding the long-term cost of a cancer or a cardiovascular disease related problem. But again, I just come back to the fact is we have to educate the public appropriately at what it means to be healthy and what are realistic expectations, and then tell them that it is achievable, that you're not beyond hope. But nothing's going to change, and nothing's going to change in this country until Americans step up and say, I'm tired of it being the way it is. I'm going to own my part. I can't change what you do, Justin, and you can't change what I do, but I can change me. And I can say, I'm going to listen to the facts, and I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to choose to help myself and put the odds in my favor to be beneficial, that I'm going to have a good quality and quantity of life. And hopefully that will be inspirational for other people as well. I'm going to know my numbers. I'm going to go see my doctor. I'm not going to be ignorant to what's under the hood of this car. I want to know what my fasting glucose is. I want to know if I have a cholesterol issue. I want to know if I have high blood pressure. I want to know that I'm at an adequate level of fitness. I want to know the basics so that I can manage them appropriately through making better lifestyle choices. So it's Americans, which we've done. It's the foundation of this country, of people picking up the John F. Kennedy. Now, what can America do for you? What can you do for America? We need to engage in that attitude again in this country, starting with our health. Because if we don't, what happens is when you already got 20% almost of the GDP going to healthcare, what happens is that just can't keep growing, right? There's only a certain number of dollars. And so what you have is the distribution of who gets healthcare is what changes. The people who can afford it are going to get it, and the people who can't are just going to be out of luck. This is not a problem that can be solved in Washington by putting more money behind it. Even if you did, there's not enough doctors, there's not enough resources to deal with the dramatically increasing demand for healthcare based solely on the poor choices that we're making as Americans. 80% of the chronic disease that we deal with can be solved by just diet and exercise. 80%. You think about that. And it doesn't take much. And to me, I'd go so far as to say it's almost malpractice for a doctor not to be measuring fitness based on what the research shows for its improvement of quality and quantity of life. If I, as a physician, if you could only give me two things to do to change a person's life, number one, I get rid of tobacco. And number two, I get them to at least a poor level of fitness, being out of that bottom category. If I do that, I'm going to dramatically change the healthcare system and the health of this country far beyond anything else that I could ever do. Now, if we come up with technology that helps people be more engaged in taking care of themselves, fantastic. But the reality is there's an enormous amount of technology out there already that does that. People are looking for quick fixes. They want to be able to eat fast food 50% of the time and not have these issues. And they don't want to have to walk, and they don't want to have to do these things. We live in an entitled society in a multitude of capacities far beyond health. And until, as a country, we start taking back what is our heritage of, I'm going to carry my level, I'm going to carry my weight, I'm going to do what I can. And it may be harder for some people than others, and maybe there's a helping hand in those situations. But until people start owning it for themselves, I hate to say, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of change. And so that's what I'm teaching, is trying to give people the information that, hey, you can do it. I don't care if you weigh 538 pounds. It's not going to happen overnight. But we're going to be here. We're going to help you. We're going to guide you. We're going to put you in a situation. And you don't have to come to the Cooper Clinic to do that. You can do that. There's plenty of resources in this country. If you want to get healthy to the level of what I consider good health, there's plenty of resources to help you do it. The government has good resources. Doctors have good resources. Hospitals have good resources. Nonprofits do. You just have to open your eyes and say, I'm done being the way I am right now. I'm done feeling, I'm not okay with how I feel. Life should be better than this, and it can be better than this, irrespective of what's going on around me. Control what you can control. And that's what I try to help patients recognize. I can't control what's happening in Africa or the Middle East. I can't control what's happening in Washington beyond voting, but I can control what I do. And you know what? If enough people take on that attitude, we're going to see some real change in this country on a multitude of different levels. And so that's what we teach.
Yeah, I love it. That's a beautiful way to end. That's what I preach to my kids, and it's what's written on one of my whiteboards in my basement workout room. Control the controllables. That's what I tell them.
Amen.
Control the controllables. Dr. Cooper, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. You're at the forefront of preventing health issues before they arise for hundreds of thousands of patients for decades. You have a very unique perspective on kind of the potential of human life, which you're talking about here, and its fragility. And so, given your experience, I would love if we could just conclude with a final question, which is how would you define a well lived life, and what kind of legacy do you hope to leave behind in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you asking that question. It's super important to me that my life is not about collecting awards and skins on the wall. Certainly, I've done a lot of those things, and they've allowed me to be in situations like this where people actually want to hear what I have to say that might help them. But the motivation in doing this is to help them. And there's an analogy that I like to use that your life is like a boat, and you're born on one shore, and we're all going to that other shore, and there's no stopping. And that's life. One day you're born, and one day you're going to die. What you do in between that time, that period, you're at the helm of your boat and you're steering that, and you have your focuses of what you care for. But right behind the boat, there's a wake, right? And the wake, right behind the boat, the wake is super measurable. All five senses, touch, smell, see, feel, hear, they can all experience it. It's super quantitative. But that part of the boat is only about as wide as the boat. If I go 2 miles back, that wake is maybe 4 miles wide, impacting every single thing that comes into its path. But yet I can't see it. And so I think what happens in our world so often is that people, in a desperate need to know that their life mattered, they're trying to stare at their wake, the quantifiable measure of their wake, and value their entire life off of that, what they can see, as opposed to saying that if I live the life that I'm called to live and I stay on course, whatever the wake is going to be, the wake is going to be. And in thousands, hopefully tens, hundreds of thousands of years from now, the decisions that we made will help people. So example being my father with exercise. Probably in 100, 200 years, no one's going to remember this organization. Maybe if you look up in a history book or something. But the wake of fitness being good for you will forever be there. That wake will be there probably for the rest of time. It's been proven. And that to me is a life well lived. And I'll tell you one more analogy. And I see this so often with patients. Many of the patients that I see have been very successful in life. Not all, but many have been very successful life in the traditional way of you think of success. And I like to use a mountain analogy. I'm a big mountain climber. I've climbed all over the world, every continent. I've climbed hundreds of mountains. Really enjoy it. But someone asked me a few years ago, what did you learn about mountain climbing? Or what have you learned from mountain climbing? I said, it takes a tremendous amount of timing, preparation, courage, effort to reach a summit of a mountain. Sometimes luck, all sorts of things. But when you reach that geographic location of which you've been trying to get there in preparation for who knows how long, maybe months, and you finally stand on the top of that mountain, and maybe even risk your life to get there, there is an incredible sense of euphoria that comes over you. All your endorphins released, you're looking around, this great accomplishment, and it's beautiful, and you just get this, it's an awesome feeling. But after about 10, 15 minutes, all the endorphins wear off, and you look around and you're like, man, if I stay here, I'm going to die. You can't live on a mountaintop. And yet our world tells us to climb 4 mountains, and that as if you can live on top of them: power, pleasure, profit, and praise. And they all sit on a foundation of pride. And I've had people in my office and throughout my life and throughout my career who have sat on the top of all those mountains, and they thought that they could build a second home, kick up a lazy boy, plant a flag. Hey, I won at life, sit back, and now I'm going to be happy. And for a metaphorical 10 minutes, they are. And then it wears off, and they're like, wait, this is what my life was about? Why am I not satisfied? I must have climbed the wrong mountain. And so they go off to do something else in hopes. For me, where it all comes from me is, as I mentioned, my faith is super important to me. And in that, I believe in loving God and loving others. And so everything I do, where I find peace in life and where I find joy in life, is not on trying to achieve something. Not that there's anything wrong with climbing mountains or achieving great goals. Those are awesome. We should do them. But the greatest joy I get in life is being able to help someone else help themselves. And whether that be through medicine or business or law or education or politics, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Maybe it's just being nice to the person at the grocery store, being generous to someone waiting on you. Those things make a difference. And, being fairly philosophical, but it seems like America's lost a lot of that care and concern for our others rather than me first. And it was so interesting. The first time I ever noticed this analogy about the mountaintop, I was actually I was doing a rotation at the Vail Hospital in Vail, Colorado. It was just a beautiful, awesome holiday retreat. And I was a fourth year medical student, and the internist was having me go in and do a history on the patients before he came in. And when you walk up to a door, there's a chart. It says chief complaint. It usually says sore back, cold symptoms, whatever. There was nothing. It was empty. And I walked in the room, and there's a well-to-do looking man, probably in his mid 60s. Hey, Mr. Smith, how can I help you here today? And he said, I'm terribly depressed and I want to kill myself. I'm like, okay, all right. Let's dive into that. What's going on? He goes, for the last 35 years, I've been busting my tail, saving my money, doing everything I can to retire and buy a big house up in East Vale, and essentially had one at life. And he goes, and 2 months ago, that's exactly what I did. And for 2 weeks, it was awesome. I woke up every morning and there's deer walking through the aspen trees and it's beautiful. And I've been here 2 months now and I want to kill myself. He goes, I thought that's what life was about. I accomplished all of my goals. I got I got the money I wanted. I got the house I wanted. I have the freedom I wanted. I had everything I wanted. I accomplished every one of my goals. And then 2 weeks, it left me wanting to kill myself because I had nothing else in life to shoot for. And I was fairly impressionable at that time. And man, it stuck with me. That is not what life's about. There's nothing wrong with trying to be the CEO of a business or make whatever gazillion dollars or some powerful political position. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you think it's going to sustain you by itself, I'm here to tell you, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of lives of people who bought into that lie and come into my office and cry and wonder where they made a mistake. The old saying is they climbed the ladder, but they leaned it against the wrong wall. Instead of saying, hey, use all those wonderful things that you've accomplished for the benefit of others, and I promise you, you will not be dissatisfied at all. And that's the best advice. I've lived it personally. I've seen it personally. And I know your clients, hopefully that will really speak to them as they're looking for significance beyond earthly success.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful way to put it and a wonderful way to end this great conversation. Dr. Cooper, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. And I hope it's helpful to all your listeners.
I hope so too. And to society at large. We've got a big problem.
I hope so.
Thank you.